right. Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to be celebrating the new edition of The Joy of Cooking. Alongside me, the authors of the new edition of The Joy of Cooking is John Becker and Megan Scott with me here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the authors and where we are and progress to where we are today. So John grew up surrounded by a natural and gastronomic splendor of the Pacific Northwest, spending his childhood between Portland, Oregon, and the Cincinnati area. John learned to appreciate a range of approaches to cooking. His father taught him the art of improvisation in the kitchen, and his mother instilled in him open-mindedness and the love of bold flavors and spice. After earning a degree obsessing over the writings of Irish modern James Joyce, John helped his friend and mentor, Dr. Blade Hobby, publish 17 collections of literary essays. John has now turned exclusively to matters of culinary, ensuring that Joy Cooking will continue to meet the high standards expected by its readership. Now, Megan Scott, who is the newest member of the Joy clan. She has worked for the cookbook since 2010, when she and John met and immediately bonded over culinary education, which began in the South, where she learned to cook from a long line of monarchies.
Matriarchs.
Typo on my end. Sorry about that. Well, you could say either or. I guess it's kind of substitutable now. Maybe not. All right. She grew up in a farming family, shucking corn and snapping green beans as far back as she can remember. She has been a cheesemaker apprentice, a baker, and an assistant pastry chef. In addition to her work with for the book, she is a culinary director for Creative Culinary Agency in Portland, Oregon as well. And if you didn't put it together, both John and Megan are team husband and wife. And they've been married 7 years, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them and let them tell their story of the new edition of The Joy of Cooking.
Thanks for coming today. We're going to just go through kind of a brief history of the book and then talk about the new edition and then open it up to any questions that you have. We'll try to keep the history somewhat brief. It's an 88-year history, so it can be tough sometimes. So Joy of Cooking was published in 1931, self-published by Irma Rombauer, who was John's great-grandmother. And she published the cookbook kind of out of a place of need rather than ultimately desire. But her husband died by suicide. He had a terminal illness and probably undiagnosed mental health issues. And Irma was left with no real way of making a living for herself and her family. So, at the time, a lot of women, it wasn't encouraged for women to go to college, so she didn't really have any formal education, and she certainly didn't have a career to fall back on. So, for whatever reason, she decided to self-publish a cookbook, which is an interesting choice. I don't fully understand how she was so successful because it was during the Great Depression, and this was a little book, a little collection of recipes. She had 3,000 copies printed initially, and then hand sold them to her friends and family, and also to bookstores in the St. Louis area. But she ended up selling all of the copies of the book, and attracted the attention of a Midwestern publisher at the time called Bobbs Merrill. They no longer exist, but I think one of the things that's interesting about the original Joy of Cooking, and perhaps the reason it was successful, is because it was a book that had a lot of personality. Irma was really smart and witty and funny, and so she kind of injected her personality into the book. And at the time, a lot of cookbooks, most cookbooks, were pretty dry. Some of the most famous ones of the day were written by home economics professionals, and they were cooking manuals. So they would teach you how to cook, but there wasn't really, you wouldn't sit down and read them necessarily. Whereas Irma's book was very friendly and conversational. She wanted to be a friend in the kitchen to her readers. And I think that was largely because, Irma didn't necessarily love to cook. It's kind of funny that she named it The Joy of Cooking because all of the evidence we have suggests that her biggest goal in the kitchen was to get out of the kitchen as soon as possible so she could get back to whatever party she was hosting or having friends over. She was very social, liked throwing parties. So we think that first edition was kind of her attempt to, she cooked because she had to, and she realized that a lot of her readers also cooked because they had to cook, not because perhaps they loved it.
Of course, she really did like baking cakes. That was one thing that she
very
undeniably loved to do. So there was some joy.
There was some joy
in there.
Yeah,
somewhere.
But then, so 1936 was the second edition that was published, and in that edition, Irma actually created a new recipe format, which is still in this current edition. It's been in the book ever since 1936. It's called the action method, and it's a really interesting way of writing recipes where the instructions and the ingredients are interspersed. So rather than having a list of ingredients at the top and then the instructions below, she wanted to combine them, not only to save space, but because it's a nice recipe format when you're in the kitchen and just trying to follow along with the recipe. It's a little harder to get lost because you're not trying to jump back and forth between instructions and ingredients.
While you're juggling pans and
chopping things
and trying to measure something.
And then in 1943, she published her third edition, which was it's commonly known as the wartime joy of cooking because she included information for how to cope with rationing. So how to use less sugar in recipes, how to use less meat or work with limited cuts of meat. She had a whole section in that edition on how to use soybeans and soy protein instead of meat, which I find really fascinating. And then
it was also the first edition to include a variety of recipes that utilized canned goods, which it was kind of the kitchen hack of Irma's day. Open 2 cans, put them together, and all of a sudden you have your own special favorite dish. But yeah, so obviously maybe not as palatable to modern day cooks, but at the time definitely revolutionary for home cooks and genuine time savers. In the 1951 edition, Irma was joined by her daughter Marion, who began to contribute editorially to the cookbook. Marion actually, she had a much better education. She had gone to college, had definitely had more of a studious mindset. Was quite the researcher. So her the first thing that she really helped out on was the bread chapter. And there was like a much more emphasis on like how ingredients, different types of ingredients, like how they interact with one another, how the leavening process takes place for yeast breads, all of that kind of stuff. And so when Irma passed away in 1962, Marion took over the revision process for Joy and published her first solo edition in 1963. And it was a really, really ambitious. I wouldn't say rewrite, that's a strong word, but it was a complete overhaul. She really wanted to turn Joy of Cooking from a personable collection of recipes into something that kind of approaching kind of the American version of the Larousse Gastronomique. This all-encompassing reference book where home cooks could turn to it and really just fill in any gaps in their knowledge with regard to whatever they could encounter, really. I mean, Marion really wanted it to cover everything possible.
And
so,
that was the famous squirrel edition.
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar, that edition actually has my favorite illustrations of all of them. It's the hands, I don't know, it's just a very 1960s illustration style. And we call all the hands that are in the illustrations, we call them the Jetsons hands because that's what they kind of look like. But there's the illustration of someone kind of stomping on a squirrel tail and then pulling the skin off.
Actually,
it's not that graphic, but very iconic.
Very iconic, not the most efficient method for doing that. In fact, we actually revised the skinning method for this edition for those of you who find yourselves in need of that kind of technique. But yeah, so in 1975, that was Marion's last edition. Again, her mission was to really turn it into this kitchen reference, this kind of resource that could really, just answer any question a cook might have. And 1975 edition was definitely like a move in that direction. And it, definitely, like for us, it was for this new edition, we took that as kind of, like the gold standard. We wanted to do what Marion did for a new generation of cooks. And so when Marion passed away in 1976, my father, Ethan, ended up taking the mantle of Joy on, and stewarded the book through two more editions. The 1997 edition, the infamous 1997 edition, which actually got rid of a few chapters because it had, let's just say that the manuscript kind of got a little out of control, and it was way too large. Could not fit into one volume if they wanted to, without it coming with a complimentary tote bag to lug it around the kitchen. So, entire chapters went missing. The preservation chapters, so canning, pickling, jams and jellies, and as well as the frozen desserts chapter, that went missing as well. And cocktails, very important. I know.
What were they thinking?
So, obviously that did not go over too well with longtime Joy fans, and we definitely heard our fans, and as a result, the 2006 edition, which marked the 75th anniversary of our first edition being published, we tried to combine the best of the 1997 edition, which really did have a lot of great recipes, and really expanded the repertoire of cuisines that we cover. We tried to salvage as much as we could from that book, and also bring back all of the chapters that went missing. So there is a cocktails chapter, thank God, in the 2006, as well as all the preserving chapters. In the 1997 edition, there was really an attempt to move forward. It was pretty drastic. It ended up being a somewhat trend-focused book. And the 2006, by contrast, was really trying to look back and try to go back to the 1975 edition. And so for this time around, we really wanted to kind of take the same approach that Marion and Irma had when revising the book. That is, being faithful to the previous edition, but also making incremental, thoughtful improvements to it. Increasing the number of subjects that we cover, but also the quality of how we approach those subjects. And so, that was really our impetus for this edition, was to just make everything better. I know it sounds simple, but it was incredibly complicated and very involved. So, we started working for the family 10 years ago. When we first started working, it was kind of like an apprenticeship period that we had. We moved to be close to my father, who was living out in the middle of nowhere in eastern Tennessee. It was probably the worst place to start testing recipes because the closest grocery store was about an hour away.
Oh, wow.
So we would basically, there would be one shopping day a week where we would shop at first we were really ambitious, and we tried to knock out 40 recipe tests a week, which that did not last very long. We started to, go at it at a little bit slower, more thoughtful pace. But so in the first 4 years that we worked for the family, we had tested over 1,500 recipes. And so that was just really the getting to know you phase of this project.
And as we were testing these recipes, we would also do what we're calling them recipe genealogies. So we would test the recipe and then go back in all the older editions and try to find it in each one and see how far each recipe went back, where it had been added, how it had changed over time. And that was a really interesting kind of scavenger hunt, because sometimes recipe titles would change dramatically over the years, and so you kind of have to dig around and see what you could find. Kind of my favorite example of that was there's a recipe for pizza in the 1940s edition of The Joy, which I would not have expected, but Irma called it vegetable shortcake. I don't know, it sounded like she didn't want to scare her readers or something, I'm not sure.
So
but
how do I make this make sense to my readership? I can't just call it pizza. I guess that was the rationale.
Yeah, I guess so.
But it really was. It's like, oh, wait a minute. That kind of looks like it kind of sounds like a pizza.
Yeah, interesting discoveries along the way. And so that whole process of testing and going back into the older editions, and also, we started taking over the Joy of Cooking social media accounts and the website and the email account. So we were getting emails from readers, we were hearing from people on Facebook and Instagram. And so getting to really know how much this book has affected people over the years. Many generations of home cooks have been using this book. So that was really instrumental in teaching us kind of what our readers valued and the fact that the book is really important to a lot of people. And so as we learned that, we were thinking about doing this edition, we realized that we had to be really thoughtful and careful with the way that we did this because, at least in our opinion, the reason the last two editions weren't as great as the ones that Irma and Marion did was because, the book had kind of, it hadn't been done exclusively by the family. There were a lot of outside contributors, many of them really talented and contributed a lot of great things. But what makes Joy of Cooking unique is its really personable voice and style, and it needs to all really fit together well. So we wanted to have that intimate knowledge of the book before we got started, and we're so glad we did that. I don't think we would have been able to revise it if we didn't have that knowledge.
No, absolutely, and in fact, while that was happening, we also were approached by an app developer and ended up partnering with them, and which basically involved taking the book apart and putting it back together into a highly structured form for an app for iPhone and iPad, and so then we got like a real I guess you could call it a master's course in the joy of cooking. I mean, just like how everything fit together. We found a lot of redundancies in that process, and we were really able to, let's just say that we had a lot of strong opinions about how the book should change or what could be improved. After all of that experience, all of those experiences, and then we proceeded to do like a very, very thorough outline of what we plan to do. We read through the book line by line about 3 or 4 times, and just would hash things out, like argue different points. Sometimes there was argument. Usually we reached at least a tentative agreement until one of us forgot like how passionate we were about something. But yeah, that's how we started off with the revision process. And then the rest is history. It was like 3.5 years of just incredibly hard work.
And in this new edition, some of the changes, as John said earlier, our goal was just to make everything better and make the book a stronger book overall. And so a lot of the changes are really small things in each section. So we were fact-checking everything that we could. We were doing a lot of research, trying to provide the most up-to-date, comprehensive information that we could, and also simultaneously testing existing recipes, and in a lot of cases trying to tweak and revise them to be a little more in step with not just modern tastes, but also, you could kind of tell, for example, when Irma or Marion had written a recipe, so when Irma was writing, she could expect her readers to have a lot more knowledge than we can expect our readers today to have. So sometimes it just meant adding more details to the recipe. Other times, for example, Marion was, she did not have a very adventurous palate. You could tell one of her recipes because it would say something like, rub the pan with a clove of garlic and then throw the garlic away. And that's not really our style, so we changed a lot of that. But then also, thinking about new recipes to add, and it was, we didn't focus group this book, so it was a very personal, the recipes we added are recipes that we just felt needed to be there. And many of the recipes that we added are regional American dishes, like Appalachian apple stack cake, Chicago-style deep dish pizza, Cajun dirty rice, just things that we felt needed to be in the book that had, and we were surprised weren't in the book already, that we wanted to add. And then we also added a lot of international dishes, mostly things that we just really enjoy cooking at home, or things that we've eaten out and decided that we wanted to figure out how to reverse engineer and make them at home for ourselves. And some of that came from, living in East Tennessee and not really having access to a wide variety of foods and just, out of desperation wanting to learn how to cook.
There were some desperate times there.
Yeah.
A lot of Sopranos.
Yeah, I watched a lot of Sopranos in all of the things. And then, we also added new techniques and ingredients. We added a section on fermentation. So Joy of Cooking has had a recipe for sauerkraut for a really long time, but never had a section on the actual process of how fermentation works and how to troubleshoot and how do you know when your ferment is done. because it's not as linear a process as most other cooking is.
And while that may seem really on trend, or like purposefully on trend, it's born from personal enthusiasm. I think that you were making kimchi in your dorm room?
Yeah, I made kimchi in my dorm room much to the dismay of my mates. But that was a great
the
experience.
whole floor stank. And
absolutely.
Yeah, the RA got involved. It was bad.
That's what happens. But so, and then I'm trying to think of other things. We added some new cooking techniques. We deal with sous vide cooking. And when we're dealing with these new appliances on the market, or fairly new, we didn't want to write recipes specifically for those appliances because we know that things change really quickly. People aren't really enthusiastic about the air fryer right now, but in 10 years, are they still going to be? Probably not. So we wanted to deal more with how to adapt how to use these appliances, how to adapt recipes to use them, giving people the knowledge to take recipes and sort of tweak them and make them their own, rather than providing a lot of hyper-specific appliance-focused recipes. But we do deal with immersion circulators and electric pressure cookers. Joy has been talking about pressure cooking since the 40s.
Yeah, Irma was started writing about pressure cookers in 1939. But yeah, it was the 1943 edition of Joy was the first to really start, recommending them. And there was actually like a tiny miniature cookbook at the back of, I think, the 43 edition that was like, here are some pressure cooker recipes. That's kind of the way we did not want to do it. We wanted to have that as something that, there are so many braises, there's so many other, grain recipes in the book that can easily be adapted for the pressure cooker, and that's kind of how we wanted to approach that subject, as well as like you were talking about those other appliances.